What is a friend? Our culture's kind of redefined friendship. Our friendship now is really how we're connected digitally. But is that true friendship? Today we're going to talk about discovering the lost art of friendship and what it truly means to have people in your life that care and love about you. Hey, let's check it out. Well, good morning. Hey, thank you for being here today. And I want to say, if you came today because a friend invited you, you know what that means? One, it means you have a friend. But two, it means that someone values your friendship. They value you, and they wanted to bring you here to be part of something we're doing here. So if you came, and I want to say thank you for saying yes, thank you for coming, but know that you are valued as a person, valued as a friend. If you invited a friend and they did not come, we still value you, okay? You're still our friend. Don't be depressed if that happened. Because eventually I'm going to get my neighbor here, but he keeps telling me no. Or actually he nods along and then doesn't show up. So that's cool too. But we are excited that you're here. Today we're going to take a little break and we're going to jump out of our series that we're going through in Romans. And today we're going to talk about the art of friendship. And then we're going to kind of nuance this and go through it a little bit. But I also want to invite you back next week because we're going to jump back into Romans and we're going to hit Romans chapter 13. And if you know anything about the Bible, you might know that's a little bit of a hot button passage because it's going to talk about the government in Christianity, right? And here's what I'm going to say. If you're a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, you're a Christian, you're going to see what it means to be a Christian, how that relationship works with the government and politics. Woohoo, it's going to be so fun. Because honestly, we might have some things wrong. And then maybe you're not a Christian, you're not a believer, but you have this perception out there of what does religion and politics looks like, what is Christianity and politics, and I guarantee you it's probably not right. And next week, as we dive into the book of Romans, we're going to see what does God and what does the Bible say about how these two things intertwine. So join us next week. You can pick at us after if we say something you don't like. It'll be fun. But today I want to start us off, and I want to just kind of drop what I'm going to call a truth bomb on you. Okay, you ready for this? And this is it. We're going to drop it. They're going to put it on the screen above me. But here it is your friends will determine your future. Your friends will determine your future. You see, this is actually not like a new thing. If you're a parent, or if you have a parent, or you at some point you had a parent, right? You didn't just miraculously pop here. Your parents knew this at one point because they told you not to hang out with certain kids, right? They're like, avoid Bobby. Like, just be friends with them. Don't talk to Bobby. Like, we know his family. We know that kid. Like, just stay away from Bobby. But everyone else is fine. And if your parents never told you not to hang out with Bobby, guess what? You were that kid, right? But like, you go hang out with everyone. You're the one they're all trying to avoid. I'm just kidding, but probably seriously. But even before your parents discovered this, before you as a parent discovered which kids you want to shield your kids from a little bit, the Bible actually talks about this. In Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, it says, "The one who walks with the wise will become wise." Imagine that. The one who walks with the wise, who associates with the wise, who is hanging out with the wise, will become wise. But then there's also a warning, but a companion of fools will suffer harm. You see, the people we surround ourselves with have an impact on where we are going and ultimately what we are becoming. You see, during the Vietnam War, a lot of the soldiers, they estimate almost half the soldiers that were in country in Vietnam from the U.S., because of the access, because of the stressful environment, because of all these other factors, became users and even addicts, you could say, of drugs. Most of them were using heroin. Almost 50% of Vietnam soldiers inside Vietnam during the war were using heroin. The crazy thing is when they came home, they estimated maybe 20% of those were addicted, in their biologically addicted. They were dependent on the drug. But what's crazy is 5% of all those soldiers relapsed in the first year and 12% over a 3-year period. You see, what happened is once they left that environment, once they left that structure and they came back home and they went their separate ways, they weren't around the same stresses, they weren't around the same people, they weren't in that same environment, it was easier, I should say, to break away from that habit. And you see, same thing with us. Who we surround ourselves, what we surround ourselves with will have an impact on what happens to our lives. And when we think about this, we need to ask questions about ourselves and about our friends. Is our friends faith-filled? Are they hardworking? Are they loving? Are they positive? Are they encouraging? Or are you and people around you self-centered, negative, have unhealthy habits, have addictions that feed it? So let me stop here, and I actually want to ask you to do a little thinking here practically. And just here, you can either take notes on a piece of paper, or, what's paper and pencil, right? Just you have your phone, take notes on your phone. But here's what I want you to do. On that, I want you to list your 5 closest friends. And I want to get your mind to start thinking. And you're not going to turn these in later, so don't worry. We're not going to turn them in and be like, all right, we're going to email them all, do surveys. No, that's a great idea. We should do that, but no. But as you're processing that, your 5 closest friends, and we're going to come back to that later, but as you're kind of like thinking through that, I want to kind of go this other direction and ask an important question, but maybe a simple question. But here's what we need to ask is, what determines a friend? You see, this has kind of been redefined over the past couple years, probably past 10, 15 years. Because too often now, you add someone as a friend on like Facebook or Snapchat, or you allow someone to follow you on Instagram or TikTok or fill in the blank, whatever, and you see someone post, you see someone interact there, but does that make them a friend? Or are maybe your friends, let's take this a step further. Let's not throw social media under the bus, right? Because it's great that we can find out things about it. I get to get tagged in super cute pictures of all my kids that my wife tags me in, so people know I'm alive and have children, which they're all sick today, so that's fun. But it's like maybe the true friends are the ones who like your posts. They comment on you, they interact with you, they share your posts, they give you nice emojis, right, on it. You're like, no, those aren't my friends. Or maybe your friend is the one who writes on your wall once a year to say happy birthday. And you're like, I haven't talked to you in 10 years, but thanks or since last year when you said happy birthday on my wall. Or I've never met you in person. That's another weird one that gets a little bit habit there. But let me give you what I believe is a biblical definition that breaks our current mold of friendship. And it is this, that a friend isn't defined by acceptance, likes, and comments, rather by commitment, love, and honesty. Proverbs chapter 17, looking at verse 17, this is what the writer says. It says, a friend loves at all times. Not some of the time, not when it's convenient, but a friend loves at all times. And then he goes on and says, and a brother is born for a difficult time. Listen to that definition. Loves at all times, meaning it's not conditional, meaning it's not just put out there when things are good. It's not just, I love you and are friends with you today and then it's gone tomorrow, but there is a commitment to the long haul. I also love that the writer Solomon here also tacks on this, and the guy who wrote this was literally in his time was labeled as the wisest man on earth. And you could probably argue he's the second wisest person of all time next to Jesus. But this is what he keeps going on. He says, I also love that a brother is born for a difficult time, meaning that a friend is like family. They will go through those hard times, but as they go through those hard times, there will be honesty, and there will be accountability, but there's going to be a commitment to staying by your side. Here's the sad part. As psychological studies have shown that realistically, by how we're wired, by our relational capacity, you can really only have 5 close friends in your life. 5 people who are truly close, who truly know you, who truly you can be vulnerable with. Super highly relational people can bump that up a little bit and can do more, but really, you're going to have 5 people that you're super close to. The average person has 2. 25% of people have 0. You see, in our time, where it's easier to connect with people to see what they're doing, to be able to see what's happening on social media, or to text them or call them, and contact is easier than ever before, we feel more disconnected and lonely than we ever have. So here's the question that I have for us today that we're going to spend some time kind of dissecting and then asking, how do we approve this, is why are friendships declining? Today, we're going to talk about three things real quick before we kind of jump into the solution for this, but why friendships are declining. And this is not an exhaustive list that I'm going to give you, but after reading a lot, listening a lot, and kind of combining different information from different studies and sources of people who have done this and looking throughout history, is why do we see friendships on such a kind of a bad decline in so much of our world? I compiled, I think, three things that I think are huge and kind of speak to us in this way. The first one is increased mobility. You see, when the Bible was written, it was written in kind of the Middle East, Europe, North Africa, a little bit of Asia. It was in that area, and it was written in a very kind of tribal context and tribal culture. And usually where you grew up, that's where you lived. The irony is that as we get to the New Testament, Rome has expanding the world through road systems, so people are starting to move a little bit, but usually they would travel and then they would come back home. And they would come back home to where their family's always been, to where the generations and generations and generations had lived. They took up the family trade, and now we live in a world where you grow up, you become an adult, you maybe go to college, you get a trade, you move away, you get a job, and you start your own life. It's like, let me pick up and move away from my family. And this is on a huge display where people, most of them, they don't grow up or they don't live long term where they grew up. Show of hands, who in here is a native to Phoenix? That's more than any other room that I've ever seen, right? That was like 10 of you, and that's actually impressive. Usually I'm the only one in the room when I say that, right? Because everyone else, especially in Phoenix, are from somewhere else. People always ask me, they're like, are you sure you want to live in Phoenix your whole life? Because I love it. And I'm like, yeah, because you left wherever you lived and moved here, right? That's why I know this place is awesome. We just stay inside for 6 months or in a pool. But anyway, and for me, okay, so I've grown up, and I grew up in Peoria, and I've never lived probably more than 15 miles from the 5 different places I've lived around the valley. This is my home. But you see, as much as that is, 10 miles isn't a lot, but the majority of my friends that I grew up with either left where we live now, or they've scattered throughout Arizona in some way, that we've kind of slowly drifted apart. And you see, this is just a totally foreign concept when you look at history as a whole, where, like we said, you lived in one place your whole life, you had deep roots, and you grew those friendships. And sadly, sometimes as we pack up and we move and we go somewhere else, a lot of times those friendships don't move with us. So the first reason we see as declining is this increased mobility, but the second one is modern conveniences. When I say modern, some of these aren't even that modern, but they're still modern when you look at the grand scheme of things. Things like air conditioning. Otherwise, we couldn't live in Arizona, right? I literally had someone last week from out of town that was talking, they didn't live here, they didn't know anything about Phoenix. So like, does everyone have like central heat cooling in their house? I'm like, you mean air conditioning? They're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. Like, we would die. A swamp cooler will make it through like April, and then you're dead in May already, right? Like without central cooling, we're all dead. Like there's no way. But air conditioning, garage doors, right? Those things shut and keep your house in. But then even more recent, online shopping. Okay, you don't have to go anywhere. You shop from your couch, or you do a pickup order at the grocery store, so I can still wear slippers and put the kids all in their car. I can have them load my groceries up and then go home, right? That's a beautiful thing. And then I think one of the last ones that is maybe one of the most impactful is the amount of endless TV and entertainment we have with streaming services. Think about it this way. You used to watch things live when they happened, right? Or you didn't get to see it. Then we moved to you could record it, and that was a big deal. And now we've moved to everything's streaming and on our own time. So once you finish one show, you're like, let me Google the 10 best shows to binge watch right now. And like, if you have 4 hours of time, you can fill it up like that, right? Does anyone have 4 hours extra time? I'll take it if you have it a little extra. But if we consume and we have all this stuff, but here's the deal. Why I say all this is we have turned our homes into palaces of entertainment where we feed the cravings and simulation that we don't see the immediate need for our friends. We can sit on the couch, we can watch a game, or we can watch a show, and we can be texting a friend. And that's how we're fostering a friendship, rather than actually spending time and being with them. I actually just did that this last week. I watched some weird show on Apple TV that's, I don't know, and I literally texted, I was like, I don't know how people think of this stuff, and sent it off to a friend of mine. And it's like that has almost become our friendship. As I was preparing for this, one of the things that in a book that this lady wrote about community and fostering friendships that they've seen in their family that has kind of created this community atmosphere is inside their house, they give refrigerator rights. Do you know what that is? It's where you tell a guest they have refrigerator rights in your house. Meaning if they come in, anything in the fridge is fair game. Now, I don't know about you. I don't even have refrigerator rights with my wife, okay? I'm reading, I'm like, this is garbage. Like, what are you talking about? But as I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I'm like, I've grown up in Phoenix my whole life. That is not our culture. And we're almost like a closed door. Like, I'll see you at church. I'll see you somewhere. I'll see you at maybe the grocery store while I'm in the pickup line. I'll see you at school or when I'm dropping the kids off. But then I go to my home. It's my sanctuary. I close the doors. I lock the door. I arm the house, which is probably good at some parts. And I'm in my little sanctuary. But you see, and even though some of those things are good, we've almost starved ourselves off from that friendship. Last thing, number 3, and this is not going to surprise you at all, but is a rise in social media. You see, social media has increased this epidemic of deferred loneliness. Meaning I post, I update, I put out a cute picture of my kids, and then I watch things pour in. People like it, people love it, people comment, and it's great. And it fills you up and it makes you feel good. But it's really not meeting the need that's deeper down inside. You feel loved. You feel like popular. You feel like people are following you. You feel like whatever, fill in the blank. And you get kind of like almost a little high from that you get from friendship. But then that momentary time passes and it leaves you wanting more. You see, the problem is it's fake, it's manufactured, and ultimately we are missing a real person, a group of real friends and friends that will fill that ultimate loneliness in our lives. You see, all of these things, from increased mobility to modern conveniences, a rise in social media, all of it has led to we have a culture that has relational poverty. And it's one that has impacted all of us to some degree. Because maybe you're hearing this and you're like, hey, I'm not on social media. Yeah, but I bet you one of these 3 things is hitting you. And like, maybe I don't have that problem at all. Like, I'm just off that stuff. That stuff is garbage. I don't want it. But maybe there's some area in your life you're almost starving yourself out. You're in your own little kind of ISO and you're not letting people in. So what's the solution? Because maybe you hear all this and maybe you're getting depressed. Maybe you hear all this and you're like, okay, yeah, you just made me feel really bad. Because maybe you've finished your friend list of your 5 closest friends and it's either smaller than you expected, or you look at it and you're like, wow, my friends are messed up just like me. Like, this makes all sense. But maybe as you're here, you're realizing there's some issues, there's some problems in here. Well, I want to wrap up today and I want to give some encouragement. I want to answer this question, is how do we rediscover the art of friendship? And as we dive into this, I want to give a little caveat and make a comment here that we started before, because we kind of started this to say that friends can be bad for you. The wrong friends can have a negative impact on you. But don't hear me in saying you need to go out today and unfriend everyone, right? Maybe you're doing that in the middle of your sermon. You're on Facebook. You're like, deleted, blocked, hid. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not saying go unfriend people. I'm not saying cut people off. I'm not saying like call them up and saying like, hey, I realize you're a bad influence on me. We shouldn't hang out anymore. That's something maybe we had to talk. Like my mom said, you're a bad influence. I wasn't supposed to hang out with you. I did anyway, and now it's bad. But don't do that. I'm never an advocate for that, because maybe there's a couple different areas here. Maybe you have a friend who you consider yourself a Christian and they're not, and they don't have the same moral standards as you, they don't have the same beliefs as you, and maybe there's just some things that don't align. That's okay. And what we're going to talk about is maybe you don't go as deep with them. Maybe you scale some of that, the vulnerability back in that friendship a little bit. But God, I don't think, ever tells us to cut people off. The exception is if people are harming you physically or emotionally, or there's some sort of abuse in that. That's a different story that you cut off. But on the other side, maybe just someone isn't as great of the influence as you. Maybe you just scale back on that rather than cut them off. This past week in our Bible group, we actually had someone who said, like, they called someone and they're like, and they said this, they're really negative, but that's just how they are, they will never change. And I stopped him and I'm like, whoa, what do you mean they'll never change? Well, that's the way they are. They're just never going to change. I'm like, all right, then why are we reading this book? Because if we think people will never change, well, one, we have a warped view of what we were before Christ. But if we don't think people can change, then we're giving up on them, but God never does. And you never know how God can change someone, how a godly influence can impact someone in a great way. But how do we do this? So how do we rediscover this art of friendship? Well, let me give 3 things that we're going to kind of see as we close up today. And the first one is to be present. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 says this, and let us consider one another in order to provoke love and good works. Listen to this in verse 25. Not neglecting to gather together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day approaching. If you want to see a friendship thrive, you need to be present with that person. You need to get together. Paul was actually writing this to a group of believers. He was writing it to a church, and he was saying, you guys need to get out of your homes. You guys need to get out, and you need to spend time with one another. And man, do we need that message today, right? We've been locked up, or we've been quarantined off, or whatever that is, or just we've been digitally checked out. And if we ever want to foster or see a friendship grow, there has to be this intentional time spent together. Growing up, I had a friend who I almost literally knew. I think he was a few years younger than me, and I was 4 or something when we first met. He was 2. So we grew up together. We even knew each other before his little brother was born. We called those the golden years. Now he's a grown man. He's a great kid. But we knew each other our whole lives. We were best friends. And anytime we talk, I'm like, yeah, my best friend. And my wife now is like, when was the last time you talked to him? It was like last year. And she's like, is he really your best friend still? I'm like, well, yeah, we grew up together, we spent all this time, and then I started reflecting. I'm like, in the last 5 years, we've probably spent about 5 days together. And it was a little bit of a gut punch to me. I'm like, am I really calling this my best friend? Is this really my biggest friendship if I don't communicate and I don't spend time in it? And you see, I would tell you that, a little side note, is men are the worst at this, right? They can say that. It's like, my best friend, we're like, oh yeah, when's my time? Well, we only talk once a year. That's why we're such great friends. We never fight, we never argue. Right? That's why it works so well. But if we don't communicate with people, and sometimes we get into that trap of saying oh yeah, my long lost friend, but they're long and they're lost, and it's not growing forward if there's not their intentional time put together. And you see, it's important to be present with your friends, to grow relationship and doing fun things and having real conversations and even having shared interests. Our worship leader, Josh, has been here now about 4 years. He wasn't here when we first started, but he's been here, I think, around 4-ish years or getting close to. But one of the first things we connected on when he came here was music, as we all listened to the same terrible music that you would say is terrible from our childhood. And we've continued it on, so much so that literally last Wednesday, we went to a concert, a show, downtown that started at 7 o'clock. I'm like, I am way too old for this, right? I'm like, I gotta be up at 5. The kids are gonna be screaming all night. I'm like, what am I thinking? And then it even got even worse because it was so loud and we didn't even wear earplugs. And I'm like, I was deaf in one ear for 3 days. I'm like, when I was in high school and college, this never happened, right? I'm like, I had great hearing. The bonus of that is I have a baby at home, one of our 3 kids, and I couldn't hear anything all night, so my wife's shaking me. I'm like, I literally can't hear out of this ear. So if he was crying, I didn't know, legitimately. But that was just a fun time where we got to spend some time together, have friendship, be outside of everything, and just go enjoy a stupid concert and make fun of people that haven't grown up yet. So, because we're all old at that show. But a friendship, here's where we get into, that you are not present in, doesn't become a friendship anymore. It just becomes an acquaintance. And here's why this is so important, because we're going to move to the second part of this, of why we need to be present, because if we're not present, it will never lead to the second part, is that we need to get open. James chapter 5, verse 16 says, therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is very powerful in its effects. Here's the current problem and of the current friendship model of social media that we see championed by our culture today, is we put on a very controlled, very fake perception of what our lives look like, right? You're not posting the pictures of what you just got out of bed, right? You're not posting of you on your worst day. Instead, you post and you put out and you talk about the very best parts of your life. We want to make sure that the narrative that we communicate is what we want, who we want to be perceived as, and what we want to look like. But true friendship is about being honest and vulnerable. True friendship is about being messy and saying, man, this is what I truly am like. These are my faults. These are mistakes. This is where I mess up. This is where I screw up. Pastor Craig Rochelle said it this way, that we impress people with our strengths, but we connect people through our weaknesses. You see, people don't care about how much you have life together. They care about how honest you are. And if you want real and authentic friends in your life, guess what? You got to be real and authentic. You got to let people behind the curtain, even when it's hard. Even when you think like, oh, if I say this, I don't think they'll want to be my friend anymore. When they know what's behind the surface, when they know how screwed up I am, they're going to run for the hills. And then you realize, oh, wait, you're just as jacked up as me. And that's when your true friendship gets a little deeper, right? Like, dang, we're both messed up. I thought it was just me. But you see, when we do this, it grows this, it brings it to, and here's how this works. So we talk about reclaiming the start of friendship, is we be present, we be open, but none of this matters, and especially when we're talking from a Christian perspective, and I think from a deep perspective, is if we don't do this last thing, which is to make friends with your Creator. John chapter 15. This is where Jesus is speaking in his earthly ministry. In John chapter 15, you're going to start in verse 13. This is what Jesus writes. He says, no one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. And he had just commanded them before this to love one another as he had loved them, how he displayed through his ministry. In verse 15, he says this, I do not call you servants anymore, because a servant doesn't know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything I have heard from my Father. You see, this is the beautiful part of all this friend talk, of who it is that we need to make a friend, of how to make a friend, how not to let relationships become hurtful in our lives or become destructive. But it all starts right here. If you're not friends first with your Creator, man, then all your other friendships are going to have problems too. You see, Jesus in his ministry, he came down here 2,000 years ago as fully God and as fully man. And he lived a life among us, not as a disconnected God, not as a God saying you're all messed up, I'm going to smite you all because I know all the baggage in your life, but as a God that says, I want to love you and I want to bring you back to me. And here's what's crazy is when you look at Jesus' life, people estimate that he spent 90% of his time with his disciples, of forming friendships, of doing life with people, of loving those around him. And he gave us that same model that we are to love those that are in our lives. But it starts first with embracing Jesus as the ultimate friend in our life, the one who came here not to condemn us, but to love us, to lay down his life for our sake, to die on a cross and to raise again so that we can truly know what salvation, what love, and what friendship looks like. Man, today, I just want to ask you to reflect on wherever you are in your friendships. Maybe you feel like you don't have any. Maybe you feel like you have the wrong ones. Maybe you feel like you just need to do a better job at being a friend and actually being intentional. But I ask that you first start at what it looks like, your friendship with Jesus. Because if you don't get that one right, everyone else is going to fail with it. Let's pray this morning.